Welcome to the 2020 On-Farm Network Results Series. I'm Megan Burns, agronomist for the On-Farm Network program. We've been conducting both single and double inoculant trials for several years now in the On-Farm Network. Let's get into our 2020 single inoculant trial results. So single inoculant trials compare soybean with and without a single application of seed-applied inoculant. In these trials, we're interested in quantifying the effect of this inoculant management on nodulation, of course, on yield, and then we've also added seed quality analysis this year. It's important to note that in order to qualify for this trial type, fields must have had at least 3 previous soybean crops in the last 10 years. So we know that the rhizobium that soybean used to form nodules is not native to our soils here. So we obviously then have to allow for an introductory period and a population buildup period by adding rhizobium through inoculation. But the question here is, once that population has built up after some successful nodulation and inoculation, we want to see what the effect of reducing that management practice is. So that's what these trials are designed to investigate. So these are the locations of the 2020 single inoculant trials. We had 4 of them in total this year. And there are just a couple of things I want to note about a couple of these trials before we dive in. So the one closest to Winnipeg, this trial here, is technically a 1.5 times rate trial, but it's still applied all on seed and is still being compared to soybean seed without any inoculant at all. So we kept it grouped in our single inoculant trials for that reason, but technically it is a 1.5 times rate trial. The second thing to note was this trial that's furthest south here, didn't technically meet the requirements for this trial type in terms of the field history. So it only had a 2-year soybean history, not a 3-year history. Generally, like I said, when we're doing soybean single inoculant trials, we require a minimum 3-year soybean history. However, this producer was still interested in testing out single inoculant versus no inoculant in this field. So we carried forward with that investigation. This trial will just be excluded, obviously, from any overall kind of big picture analysis we do when we group all of the data together, because it doesn't meet the requirements for the field history that we like to see for these trials. So just a couple things to note there as we go through. So let's take a look at how we rate our nodulation before we get into our results. So this is the nodulation rating scale that we use in the On-Farm Network. We're rating basically for 3 different things. So we're taking a look at the above ground plant biomass and seeing how it looks in terms of growth and vigor. The next thing we look at is we dig up the plant roots, we wash them off, and we count how many nodules there are. So this is really important. We want to make sure that we have the minimum number of active nodules that we need in order to meet the soybean nitrogen nutrition needs. So we're looking for at least 10 nodules. That's kind of the cutoff lowest number that we would want to see at the R2 stage, which is approximately when we rate for nodules in our soybean inoculant trials. And then we also take a look at how those nodules are distributed on the root mass. Are they more concentrated at the crown? Are they more present on lateral roots? Or is it some combination of both? Now, in the results that we've presented here, the focus is on the rating for how many nodules are present, but obviously getting a big picture idea of how the plant is looking, how many nodules there are, and how they're distributed are all important factors to consider. Okay, so jumping into the results at the first trial. So this was the one that only had 2 years of soybean history instead of 3, so just keep that in mind. But there was no significant yield difference between soybeans with and without a single inoculant. We see that nodulation was very similar between treatments, and this falls above the good category in our rating scale. So that means nodulation was certainly adequate to meet the nitrogen nutrition needs of the soybean crop. And because there was no increase in income at the end of the season to offset the cost of the single inoculant in the spring, that cost is then presented as just a loss in profit per acre because we weren't seeing that boost in yield and that boost in income to offset that cost. So we have a similar story at the second trial. Yields were very similar between treatments. There was no significant difference for soybeans with and without a single inoculant application. We see again, our nodulation ratings are very similar between treatments. This is still considered more than adequate on our rating scale. And again, we just have that cost presented as a profit loss because we're not seeing that boost in yield with that application. And And then the same kind of results at the next trial with no significant yield difference. This was the 1.5 times rate trial, but no significant yield difference between the inoculated soybean seed and uninoculated. Again, we have really good nodulation here and very similar nodulation ratings between the two treatments, not seeing that increase in income with an increase in yield to offset that product cost. And again, the same story at the last trial. Now, although there isn't an increase in yield to offset the cost of inoculant, we do recognize that there might be a bit of an insurance mentality here to applying a single inoculant with your soybean after you've been producing soybeans for a number of years. So you might be at a point where you've built up your rhizobium population, you've had a couple of successfully nodulated soybean crops, and you probably could be safe to apply no inoculant in a year and not see a yield deficit or a production deficit. However, it may not be within your risk tolerance or your management strategies to do so. So we definitely recognize the relatively inexpensive insurance value of continuing with a single inoculant application strategy. So I just wanted to point that out, that although we present it as a profit loss per acre, there is a certain sort of insurance value, peace of mind value that comes into play there too. So in terms of what's next for single inoculant trials, I think starting to look a bit more at those economic outcomes over time and soybean response to single inoculant over time will help us determine how often that just in case or insurance application comes in handy. So under what conditions is that necessary? Under what conditions does it lead to a significant increase in yield or a significant difference in nodulation ratings even? And I think one of the next necessary steps for this trial type is to start determining when it's time to apply inoculant again. So maybe it is within your risk tolerance, maybe it is within your management strategies to go without an inoculant application after you've built up a proper soybean history. But at what point should you be applying that inoculant again? So that's a question that we would like to investigate further through our single inoculant trials, take a look at how that necessity is affected by growing season conditions or affected by how many years there are between soybean crops, et cetera, et cetera. So there's definitely more work we would like to do with this trial type to start answering some of those sort of further bigger picture questions. So we'll certainly be looking to continue with single inoculant trials next year and in future years to try and get at some of those bigger picture answers. So a big thank you to all of our on-farm network participants. If you are interested in learning more, getting involved, or if you have a trial idea, please contact me at any time. Thank you.